If you're in college right now, it kind of feels like not having an internship means you're already behind. You're applying on LinkedIn, you're applying directly on company sites. Maybe you're even networking a lot and nothing's happening. You're not hearing back, no interviews, and the pressure keeps building because everyone around you seems to be landing something while you're still waiting. If you've been in that spot, this episode is for you. Hi, I'm Hillary. I'm a marketing manager at Sprouts, which people like to call Tinder for job applications. Today, I'm sitting down with Augustine. He's currently a junior at Michigan State and just landed a finance internship at Barclays as an operations analyst intern. What I really like about Augustine's story is that his recruiting process was not linear at all. He wasn't hearing back at first, he was applying across multiple platforms, and he felt the same pressure a lot of students feel. And then he made a few key changes that completely shifted his outcomes. In this episode, we're breaking down the three specific changes he made that helped him start landing interviews and ultimately secure his role at Barclays. Before we get into what changed, I want to give some context on who Augustine is and where his head was at before going into recruiting, because that mindset matters more than people think. Augustine, before we dive in, do you want to give a quick intro for everyone listening?
So my name is Augustine Blade. Once again, I'm a junior at Michigan State University studying economics and minoring in resource management. Just as a brief backstory, I actually started pursuing marketing and then I had a career change. And that was what kind of caused that friction in the job search, which Sprout helped me with a lot. We'll get into that later. But yeah, that's just a brief background about me. And this summer I will be an operations analyst at Barclays. Very entry level finance internship, but I'll use it as a launch pad for other careers in the future.
I've seen that you've done a lot of strategy and pricing work and projects through a consulting club. And at one point, you even worked internationally at Ghana. Going into this recruiting cycle, I assume that you were looking at consulting, finance, analytics roles. At this point, first semester in college, did it feel like getting an internship was optional, or did it feel like it's something that you had to get? What was the main driving pressure for you? Was it because of the peers that you were around, people telling you that you had to get an internship, or was it more so a pursuit of advancing your career further beyond graduation and after college?
Yeah, so there was definitely two, maybe three main reasons for me. The first one, I do have to say, peer pressure. Everybody's looking for prestigious roles to land, not only to tell their peers, but also to elevate their resume and make sure they can land that 100K job out of college. So that did become a milestone for me in a way, was kind of, oh, my peers are getting A, B, and C job, Bain, PwC, Deloitte. And then I was looking at my resume and it was kind of like, okay, well, in terms of internships, I don't have that, but everything else you have, I have. So who's going to give me that opportunity? Then I realized nobody's going to hand it out to me. I have to go and look for it. So that's where an ego part of it came in, where it was anything that you can do, I can also do. So just making sure I put my head down and get to that goal by any means necessary was that second motivator, just proving myself right in a way that I can do it and I can get a job or an internship despite the difficult job market that we're in. And then also the third reasons, just professional aspirations, making sure that I do have a job out of college, ego and peer pressure aside, that also matters. I don't want to graduate and then have a 2 or 3 year gap where I don't have anything going on at all. Just making sure that I have a stable job that I can graduate into and not have a time lag period. That was also something that was daunting at that time to think about. Obviously, when you're in college, you're thinking about the college experience and graduating, spending time with friends, but then life goals come first. So dedicating that first semester, junior year was imperative for me.
One thing I am very curious about was your experience in the consulting club. What were some skills that you learned when you were applying to get into the consulting club? And what were some projects and tasks that you did while you were a member that you felt like really helped beef up your resume and eventually helped you land the role at Barclays?
Yeah. So in terms of joining the consulting org, the first and most important thing that I must say is number one, the importance of networking. Initially, when joining that org, I didn't really see it as something that was more of a corporate simulation in a sense. I saw it as more of like students getting together in common interest to do work for just the sake of doing the work. And then I realized that no, the way I carry myself approaching this is the same way I'll carry myself going into the job market. So I kind of used that as a launch pad to kind of test certain theories in my head. So I was going to apply to a consulting or a canvas, is limitless consulting, student entrepreneurs, facing student consultants in a way. So I made sure to do proper networking within the club, talking to the VP, talking to the president, consultants, getting a overview of what the club and daily experience was like. And that proved to be very useful for me as I got through the interview process very seamlessly. Also, doing that in my job search also sped up the search in a way. Even if it ended up in a rejection, at least hearing back calms nerves instead of being ghosted. So that was one thing that I did learn. Networking is very important for your own self. And also having that safety net just in case something goes wrong and having somebody to reach out to, even if that opportunity didn't lead to an actual endpoint at a time. The second thing I will say is projects that I worked on. I think having actual client facing moments was another big thing that allowed me to have stories to talk about in interviews. One of my favorite clients that I've worked with is Guidely. He's making kind of like a student counseling tool where students can come in as a freshman or as a sophomore, even as a high school senior, not knowing which career they want to get into, but by playing around with this tool, the tool kind of gives them kind of like a path, internships to go to, the majors required. All of these tools for somebody who might be going to a community college that doesn't have a robust community or career network. So working with him was very inspirational to me, seeing that even if I'm helping in my small way, it's still something that I cherish. Not only can I look back on, but is also somebody I can tap into later on in life. And then when I tell that to interviewers, it's obviously a signal that I've had actual client facing experience. So that's something that I think is not only beneficial to me, but to anybody watching, making sure that you can join student orgs that are relative to the job that you're looking for. That's something that you shouldn't overlook.
Prior to swiping on Sprout, applying to the actual job board, did you do any networking with the recruiters before you land your interviews? Was just curious about what that process might look like for you.
So in terms of the actual Barclays internship, I must say that was a very cold application, which is another thing I must say as a caveat to this. Applying for internships is very much a numbers game as much as it is, applying to careers that are very specific to you. You can't send out 10 applications and expect to hit big. You have to put out a lot. So before I get into the details of that, it was very, very cold applications. But as soon as I got the assessment to at least take it to get into that first round of interviews, I immediately went to LinkedIn and started looking at people within my role and other adjacent leadership roles and started asking them about what the job was like, what's the day to day, what are some skills that I can bring in on day one to bring value in a sense. And kind of having my name in the system in any way, shape, or form, whether it be a LinkedIn message, was kind of like rule number one for me. So that at least if I get to that first round interview and I say, oh, I spoke to person A or person B, that's another signal that somebody will look at like, oh, this student has done his homework. So I will say, in terms of networking, that is what I did in that initial stage. But besides that, it was still a very cold app, nothing too out of the ordinary, like calling a VP or knowing somebody at the bank personally. Like, no, just shouting out on LinkedIn and sending emails, hoping to hear back was something that I did.
That's really awesome to hear. And I'm really glad that this application worked out for you quite well. I feel like a lot of students can relate to this feeling of doing everything right and still not getting results. So I just want to rewind to what recruiting actually felt like for you before anything started working. So when you first started applying, what did the job searching look like on a day-to-day basis for you? Were you hearing back from any companies at all prior to using Sprout?
Yeah. So, one thing I will say before getting into specifics, persistence is key. Having a thick skull is another one. Waking up and seeing 4 rejection emails is not easy to do on a day to day, especially when I said earlier it's a numbers game. But as well, you have good numbers and you have bad numbers. So I would say prior to using Sprout, it was either I apply to 20 and hear back from one and it's a rejection, or I apply to 20 and hear back from none. Definitely applying on other third party websites. It was definitely a chore. Sprout also made that easy by kind of using an email that kind of like translates whatever they send back to you. It's all in one spot instead of having to log into many different accounts to get a message. That was also very frustrating early on when I wasn't using Sprout. So it was definitely difficult. Amongst all the rejections, I think the ones that annoyed me the most was not hearing back, especially if you make your application process very long to even submit, and then I don't hear back. It's kind of like I could have used that time to do another application. But yeah, I think persistence is key, making sure you don't take it on the chin and, take it too personally. And at the end of the day, somebody's also doing their job, rejecting you as well. So just got to keep it pushing.
So, when you were sending out these applications, was there ever a moment in time when you realized, okay, doing more of the same isn't going to work? I need to change something in the way I'm applying for these different jobs. Was there anything specifically that made you step back and rethink your initial approach? And was it due to exhaustion, lack of time, the lack of results, or was it finally getting clarity on what you wanted specifically in the role?
So I must say, in terms of my internship search, it wasn't as aggressive until I joined my consulting org and dialed in on either finance or consulting. So before, my strategy was purely applying to the jobs that I liked in mass. The only problem is when you're applying in mass to an ultra specific role, the options are not many. So doing heavy networking between 5 companies to try and land a role at those 5 companies. Obviously, as a junior, networking now, you're kind of late, kind of behind. So nobody's going to really give you that time of day. So at that time, I kind of realized that my initial strategy wasn't working and I can't be picky at this stage. So expanding those roles that I was willing to get into instead of just becoming a business analyst, I can go into data analytics. Instead of trying to do wealth management, I can do other finance roles. So I expanded that net and then immediately realized, well, with expanding the net, it also requires a much more of a time commitment to apply to said application. So it was definitely um, a very jarring moment for me to kind of realize, okay, this is a bridge that I kind of have to cross. I just have to spend more time on applications and I can't really be picky. So it was definitely a bummer at the time. Uh, but I will say switching to Sprout kind of nailed all of those problems into one system where I can apply to many jobs and have my resume and cover letter tailored. That was another thing that took a lot of time and which was the most annoying part for applying to a lot of jobs was having to tailor my resume and my cover letter every single time. That was probably the most daunting part of having to apply to a much broader job selection because that's many more applications I have to tailor. So that was definitely something I wasn't really willing to do at the time because of how many things I had to do outside of job applications. So Sprout definitely made that easy and, it worked out for me in the end.
Let's talk about the real first shift you made, which was not how you applied, but what you chose to apply in the first place. So before you changed anything, how were you deciding which roles were worth applying to? Aside from Sprouts, where were you mostly finding jobs? And what was the job discovery process like for you?
Yeah. So my initial top 2 places to look for internships prior to Sprout was LinkedIn and Handshake. Cause when you get into college, most of the time it's kind of like you need to be on LinkedIn, you need to be on Handshake. Those are kind of like the top 2 big dogs in terms of applying to jobs. One thing I will say with applying on LinkedIn, one thing that did kind of make it somewhat seamless early on when I didn't have many jobs to pick from was sometimes you can auto apply based on your LinkedIn profile. But oftentimes, a lot of those jobs were not necessarily in my field anyway. But again, just sending out applications because I wasn't really too sure what I wanted to do at that time. But then after tailoring my resume over and over and over again, applying to certain jobs, I realized that there were certain characteristics of a job that I liked. I liked highly analytical jobs. I like client facing roles. And then by tailoring my resume over and over again, I started to realize patterns that I actually grew an affinity to. So then that helped me kind of decide what career to get into. So oddly enough, by doing something that I didn't like, I was able to find something that I actually liked and then use that in my newer strategy to apply to roles. So outside from LinkedIn and Handshake, sometimes I would go on Google and just search for analyst roles at said company 2026 or 2027. Another thing that I also like to do, I like to leverage chat in applying for internships. I'll type into ChatGPT, what are the open internship roles that have closed dates that are far away? Obviously, this is relative to the time that I did it. But for example, in November, I remember looking for internships that were rolling at the time. So I typed in companies that have rolling internship applications and it gave me a list. So I put those all into an Excel sheet and apply it according to that. But again, that's a very broken process and you have to monitor many different accounts and many emails. So that's something that I had to kind of stop, but obviously switching to Sprout solved all those problems.
When it comes to applying to multiple jobs, it's a very fragmented process. You'd have multiple tabs open, and even for LinkedIn, when you click apply, sometimes you could apply directly on the job board on LinkedIn, or it'll take you to a different page, which makes it a little bit hard to keep track of if you're not as organized. Just out of curiosity, when you were applying to your roles, have you ever considered relocating to a different place that might have not necessarily been your first preference in terms of location, or just really broaden your search in ways you hadn't before?
Yeah. So initially, I was kind of dead set on my internship needs to be in either DC, Maryland, or Virginia because that's where my house is. So in terms of commuting, I was definitely a lot more dead set on that area because there's a car back home that I can use. I wouldn't have to worry about relocation or anything like finding an apartment and leases and all those things. However, I kind of realized again, beggars can't be choosers at this stage. It was more of a lot of the finance internships are definitely more in the New York, New Jersey area. But I think deciding between consulting and finance, I had to be willing to move because it was either Atlanta, Chicago, New Jersey, New York. Those are a lot of the big offices that I was gunning for earlier on. So it became fairly obvious that DC, Maryland, Virginia was just not going to cut it at this stage. Maybe later on when I have leverage, I can go back, but early on, you just got to make some sacrifices. My internship will be located in New Jersey, specifically Whippany. I've never been there before, so it's definitely another exciting thing that I think is in store for me this summer, getting to explore a new city. Obviously in your 20s, you do want to go to different places, but obviously when you see that price tag, it gets a bit scary. But, just being able to explore a different city is also something that I'm looking forward to.
All right, so let's go into the next change, how you position yourself. So, once you were clearer on which roles you wanted, the next challenge was making sure that your resume actually reflected that direction. So, before you made any changes, how did you feel about your original resume?
That's that's another funny story. So the initial decision to kind of pivot from ambiguous roles to specifically consulting and finance, I realized that my resume needed immediate changes. I went to my career counseling office and they walked me through what I needed to do for, a resume that kind of succeeds in a more business role. That was step number one. After that, I kind of realized, okay, well, on this resume, there are certain skills that are expected of me for set roles. So I did certain certifications. I leveled up my Excel, SQL, Tableau, PowerPoint. A lot of other roles that would have, required these skills also were in that net. So I just made sure that if I'm going to be submitting this resume into different places, it might as well have the skills that are necessary for said jobs, even if I wasn't a master at them, but just knowing that I had some kind of like groundwork. Now, when applying for the internships, you know, some of the internship applications had an older version of my resume on them. So sometimes I go back and look at it and I look at that resume and I just laugh because you're very bold, very ambitious, but then you don't have the tools available to you at that time. So you look back at an older version of yourself and just admire the tenacity, but you just didn't have the tools.
I know you might have touched on this briefly earlier, but was there ever a moment where you thought, I know I can do this job well, but my resume isn't making it that obvious?
Initially, I was going for MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. I wanted it all. I wanted to go for the big dogs. I wanted to make sure I could get into those, spaces. And I knew I could do the job because in terms of casing, I did a lot of practice casing to get into the consulting club that I was in on campus. And I picked up on that skill fairly quickly and I still practice now. But then looking at the not necessarily the kinds of people, but the skills the people they were hiring had and the resume they had, and then looking at mine, I realized there was a very huge disconnect. There was a language that they spoke that I couldn't speak, technical jargon that I didn't know, a lot of things that just were not in my realm of understanding just yet, even though it wasn't necessarily hard to understand. But again, a lot of things are gate kept, and unless you go out to find them, you won't find them. Like I didn't know consulting was a career that I could even get into prior to coming to college. So that was number one, just discovery and then finding out what is it that needs to be on my resume that signals that, okay, I could be a consultant or I could get into strategy in general. So there was definitely a pause in my recruiting journey where I kind of took about maybe 2 or 3 weeks to kind of just tailor my resume to those jobs and be like, okay, I need to do this, 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 and this. I need to do a case competition. I need to have an Excel project. I just need all the things they have. So that definitely did take a while, and it did take a huge chunk out of the recruiting process because I kind of felt shy almost to submit a lackluster version of my resume when I knew there were other people like my peers submitting, you know, a resume that was top notch. So I kind of took some time to rebuild. And, in the process of rebuilding, it was kind of like, oh, I'm losing time. But then there was obviously upside to that. I started hearing back a lot more, even though it didn't lead to second round or even first round interviews. It's still led to me hearing back. So there definitely was a return on investment in that end. But yeah, I think to anybody listening, taking that time to actually revamp your resume intentionally will always yield something for you in the end, even if it's not what you're looking for, but to step in the right direction.
The last shift I want to talk about is something I see constantly with students, which is the trade off between speed and quality when applying. I feel like a lot of students fall into one of two buckets when applying for internships. Either they go really slow and overthink every application by manually tweaking bullets, or they just go full volume mode and blast the same generic resume everywhere. I want to talk about where you were specifically on that spectrum. When you weren't seeing success, were you manually tweaking resumes and cover letters? Were you using AI tools like ChatGPT, but still spending a ton of time per application? Or did you just ever try to apply to a bunch of different roles and hope that one would stick?
Yeah. So, first thing I must say is initially it was definitely more of just blasting a generic resume everywhere. Because again, I didn't know initially that you had to tailor your resume or you had to change your cover letter. I think it was more of a, oh, I'm presenting myself and my current skill set. And in my head, it was more of the recruiter's job to kind of be like, is this person a match? But then I found out that there's kind of like unwritten rules that nobody's going to tell you unless you're in those spaces where like you have to address the recruiter. If you have their name, put it there. Like there's a lot of things that kind of fly under the radar for somebody who's ignorant in that sense. So I think the main thing of where I sit on that radar, uh, to say the truth, in the beginning, it was more of just submitting generic, but then that pivotal point for me before Sprout, and then after that, I'll talk about that. But before Sprout, where it was just me, again, I said finance and consulting every 2 weeks I'd switch the industry. For one set of 2 weeks, I'd apply for strictly consulting so that it wouldn't be me tailoring my resume to a huge degree to fit finance. For a 2 week period, I could breathe. And if I was going to switch something, it would be like a company name or a certain skill that I know they prioritize for said roles. But then Sprout came along, and then I realized, oh, I don't have to do all that. I can just swipe and get to the job. And I did that same system though. Like sometimes I applied for finance, sometimes I applied for consulting. And then I found there were also other roles that were kind of like a good blend of the two, like business analytics. I started applying to that as well. But without Sprout, I wouldn't have had that opportunity to find other careers that also blended the two things that I like to do in a sense. So Sprout kind of gave me that time to kind of broaden my strategy. So that's something I'm thankful for as well.
That's really awesome to hear. And essentially, you started moving faster without losing quality on your applications because you were tailoring each one, but you were spending less time to tailor each application, each resume, each cover letter. And just out of curiosity, when you started using Sprout, how did that change how much time you spent per application?
Just to keep it very brief, per application prior to Sprout, I think I'd spend probably like 15 minutes. simply just by checking, oh, can I put a student org on here for a job experience? Can I put different things? Like just being over meticulous in the job application. And then when it came to Sprout, obviously if I had enough credits, I just swipe. So 15 minutes to maybe like 2 minutes, just background research of the company and what exactly I was applying to. Even Sprout gives you that description of the company, what the job role is. So you don't really need to do that. But again, I was just being a bit nervous doing that. So 15 minutes all the way down to 2 minutes was kind of like that time.
We're at the final home stretch of summer internship recruitments. This is the second wave and probably the final wave. What is one mistake that you see a lot of students making when they apply for internships?
Giving up too early is the main thing I will say. Going in and thinking that because you don't have a big brand internship on your resume and listening to the noise is another thing I will say. And right now, there's a lot of people who say the job market is doom and gloom, which to a large extent, it kind of is at the moment. But that is not an excuse for you to kind of like say, oh, I'm not going to apply anymore because A, B, and C person didn't get it. I can't get it. So, in terms of the actual reason, and another thing that I would say is not doing enough research is the main problem that I see, where some people apply to roles blindly, not knowing what the job requires, how much networking you have to do, who's like a hiring manager. Obviously, you're not going to find all of that information immediately, but just the attempt to find it, you'll find it more times than not. So, not doing enough research is also something that essentially you'd be shooting yourself in the foot by not doing. So, yeah, giving up too early and not doing enough research and listening to the noise, you really need to block out the noise, especially at this time. Don't believe what people say about not being able to find a job. They weren't able to, doesn't mean that you can.
How would you recommend for students to do research? So, would it be more company specific research, team specific research?
Yeah, so definitely two things. If you're in a student org that's tailored towards the jobs that you're looking for, connect with the seniors because they've been through the mud already in a sense of if they were recruiting, they've recruited for internships and they're recruiting for full time. So they will have tips and tricks that you might not find on TikTok. Because again, if somebody's applying for a job and they've applied for multiple and they've been in your shoes before, that is somebody who's going to give you valuable advice instead of generic advice you would get from a career center or somebody on the internet. You know, they'd give you the step by step and even walk you through it because that's a personable explanation. Also, in terms of if you're not in a student org, just finding older people in your network, whether it be family or people who have the same major as you, or somebody who graduated from your school and is doing the exact same job as you. Reach out to them and have a coffee chat or have a phone call or send a text message or something like that. Let them give you actual real life first person information that will be actually valuable to you because again, there's a lot of people saying a lot of things. Not all of it is valuable to you at this stage. Making sure you filter what the information you have will actually kind of, either catapult or slow down your application process. So just kind of filtering where you get information from is key.
Last question. If you are talking to a junior who hasn't heard back from anyone yet, what's the one thing you tell them to focus on this month?
The one thing I tell them to focus on is not to take it personally. Because a lot of times, again, you might wake up in the midst of the recruiting process and see 5 rejection emails. Like none of that is on you. Again, a lot of these processes are automated. A lot of these processes, you might not be a good fit for the role. That is not necessarily something that is something you should take personally. Just use it as leverage to go at it again. Try again. Even if you have to try for a whole year, do it because there's somebody else who's not willing to do that. And when that opportunity comes up, it's better to be ready and then an opportunity comes than not be ready and an opportunity comes and then you're left wanting. So just making sure you don't take it personally and keep going at it is number one. And that might not sound like something valuable to somebody who might not see anything right now. I promise if you keep punching the wall, it's going to break. The last thing I'll say is just thank you, Sprout, for changing my life. That's all I got to say. Because without Sprout, and I really don't know, but it just made the process a lot easier. And I think it can for you too, if you're watching. Just get on Sprout, try it. Don't be afraid of a paywall. It's an investment. Trust me, it's an investment. But just get on it. Just start swiping. You might be at the gym. You could swipe. You might be watching a movie. You could swipe. You never know that application that you sent when you first woke up in the morning could be your big break. So just download Sprout.